And it was my father who had a friend, a college friend from Dartmouth, who was a judge on the tax court. And he's the one who arranged for Dean to be appointed as his assistant for 3 years. We didn't stay the full 3 years, but almost 2.5 years. Clarence Opper, who was he was opposed to almost everybody sooner or later on most of the decisions, and he wrote a great many minority opinions when things came up. And your dad, wrote a lot of them or did the research for him. And he said several times to Dean that if I knew you were going to stay in government, I'd give you a top rating. But I'm not going to do that. Because if I do that, then I have to stand around and propose you and push and do politicking to get him onto the government scene. And he knew that Dad was going to come back to Cleveland and help his dad with the tax business. So he didn't do that. But Dean was there about 4 or 5 months, and he'd gone through the whole backlog of cases that had piled up. So
and then I worked with the chief judge on loan because I'd have extra time on my hands. And that turned out to be a very, very beneficial training for my going on to practice when we moved out here to Chicago. I think that the Clarence Opper, Judge Opper, put it in terms of, I think you're going to be a very successful lawyer, but you're not an intellectual. I think that's essentially what he said to me.
And that just corroborated Graham's idea that, well, I never was that intellectual because I wasn't like the family that memorized poetry and talked philosophy and things like that. They were all up on the latest magazines and the latest shows on TV, and it was a whole different culture as far as the background. Their house was very elegant, though. It wasn't plain. They sort of dressed things up so that, and he was such a nice guy. His father, he wasn't well for a long time. They really did practice Christian Science, and so Gramps never missed a day in school.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Never sick once, right?
And not once. Bonnie got kept in for something she got, whooping cough or whatever.
Wow.
And when Amy got not whooping cough, what was it? Mumps, on a trip that I took with you and Amy to see Gramps' father, my father, in Cleveland after Mother had died. Amy came down with the mumps. She was there. I'd never had the mumps. On the way back on the train, and once I got back to Chicago, I had a little bit of soreness, but nothing much. And Gramps never got anything. So I think he was born with all kinds of immunities.
Right.
And it caught up with him when he got the flu this week, 2 weeks ago. But
well, it took me to get to the 80s before I had any of these problems.
It's not so bad, though.
And that's pretty good,
Yeah,
80 years running free and clear.
it's pretty good.
I don't think he was more miserable with any of the things that he's had recently with his heart or his stroke than he was with the flu this last 3 weeks. It was miserable. It was miserable.
3 weeks is a long time to be sick. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
where
let's
were we
see.
anyway now? Where are we going to catch up with?
How about, so moving to Chicago, let's talk about that. How is that?
What was that?
Moving to Chicago.
We left us at the tax court in
Yeah.
D.C. What
Yeah.
happened?
Oh, that was DC.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
That was in
Well, we came,
Just wanna make sure they're first.
back to Cleveland, and I had you girls, your dad came to work with a firm that was a Washington firm, and they were opening a new office in Chicago. And I don't know where you stayed. You stayed with one of your friends.
I stayed at the house of the wife of one of my friends from Dartmouth, fraternity brother at Dartmouth, whose family went to Florida each winter. And so I had the run of that house while I looked and located a place. I did something that was probably not very smart in terms of the, I think Judge Opper made it pretty clear that you didn't think that was the smartest move I'd ever made. But when I left the tax court, I'd interviewed with firms from around the country, but mostly in the Midwest, because I wanted to be here. I didn't want to go back to Cleveland for sure, and I wasn't that happy about even possibilities in Philadelphia, even though my sister lived there with her family. But I was asked to go with a law firm that has a blue stocking Washington law firm, a tax law firm. The president of the tax section of the Bar Association is a partner in that firm. People from that firm became or were Treasury secretaries or IRS hotshots, general counsel, that sort of thing. And I figured I'd like to have that anchor in Washington, even though they're opening an office in Chicago, because I knew that I'd be working with top-notch tax people, and I'd be better able to make the judgments on an everyday basis that make a deal go or not go. And so I did, but that firm, the Chicago office, never did prosper as they expected, so they were going to close it. And I sure as heck didn't want to go back to Washington. Washington and Cleveland were definitely out. And so I interviewed and went with the Schiff Hardin firm, which was the happiest experience I could have had. I mean, that.
But he didn't have colleagues who knew all this stuff. He sort of ran the tax department at Schiff Hardin.
Right. I stepped right in, and they put me right out on the firing line, and I probably was number 2 lawyer on well, I can think of at least 4 New York Stock Exchange listed companies where I became the go-to guy if the billing partner wasn't around. And it all came about from going out and doing the tax work, and then three of those firms asked me to come with them as an executive, and I never wanted to do that. As I told them, I'm more valuable to you with a diversified background than if I came with you, just worked on your problems, and then when something new came up, I'd have to go out and figure it out, whereas I probably would be bumping into it or moving into it in some other setting. And but that turned out to be just a really great arrangement for me, because it was free play. It let me do the things that I liked to do when I first started out in law, and it let me volunteer and become ultimately for Park District and then village attorney in Winnetka, all while practicing tax law in the Sears Tower. And it's when we finally started organizing as a law firm. It was something like 20 lawyers when I went with it. And it's over 300 or 400 now. And when I left, it was over 200.
Changed the practice a lot too, that whole
Hugely.
reorganizing of,
So-
another whole, it was happening everywhere, consolidating into bigger and bigger
Yeah.
firms.
So tell Abby a little bit about that first house you rented in Winnetka. Remember?
Oh, sure.
Right.
Where is she?
Sophia Hogg right here, that's right, that's Sophia Hogg.
Alright.
Yeah.
And
show
that
it.
terracotta was done by Charles Hogg, who did the statue at Lloyd Park. Oh, boy.
Sorry, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put it
Okay.
here.
Charles Hogg was a sculptor, a Swedish sculptor, and she was, Sophia was
The landlady.
our landlady.
And she lived in back in the studio, and we lived in the house, and it had 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms on the second floor, and a bathroom up there, nothing on the first floor, and a basement, and lots of carvings all over. And one day, I came home, and Sophia, who was in her 80s then, our age now, she was a fairly good-sized person, and red hair. And she was on a ladder teetering over the stairs down to the basement, because the wine cellar that was up above, you know, just as you go down,
There's a cabin that was
Okay.
down
and it had the little dwarfs guarding the wine cellar, and they were fading, and she needed to touch it up. So
she was painting.
she was painting, and I was amazed. She was wonderful. Her husband had died some years before. He'd been supported in large part by the Winnetka
Lloyd
family,
family.
the Lloyd family, who had a big house on Sheridan Road, and they were
And Lloyd Park is named after them.
right. And they were close in with the guy who was the lawyer who did the case in Tennessee, and the
Clarence Darrow?
yes, they
The
were close to
Sculptor?
them.
Wow.
Yeah, they were close to them, and they sort of watched over her a little bit, and she would pick plums and make jam and take it to them and things like that. And she loved having little girls. Little boy, no. But your mom and Amy could toddle out to her place in back, and she would welcome them at any time. And she loved having them around, and she made cookies for them, and she picked plums for them, and she picked things off of the other trees.
She
She's
probably
just-
even showed them how to weave and.
She did. I have,
Oh, really?
she had this big loom, kind of like Barrett heads in her house, and she kept, and she would show us how to weave, and she let us move the shuttle. She would also, when we told her about swinging on that tulip fence, remember
Uh-huh,
the fence? You should, maybe you could describe that a little for Abby.
It was a fence around the front of it, and it had uprights with green stems and tulip flowers, red and yellow, all the way around. And you went in the door, up the steps. There was no parking except right at the edge. There was no garage, nothing like that.
Garage.
And I don't know how I got through that early pregnancy, running upstairs to the bathroom all the time. But when we knew we had a little boy coming along, there was no way we could stay there. It wasn't going to be big enough for us, and it was a little tight. So we started looking, and eventually
moved
To the house on Cherry Street.
to the house on Cherry Street, right. Shortly after Craig was born, Amy was sick again. What did she have that time? Measles or
Yes,
chicken pox
She
or
had
something?
measles because I caught it on Easter, and I remember I was crying because I thought the Easter bunny wouldn't come. And then he came. And you guys, you know, that celluloid grass, fake grass
Yeah,
stuff?
right.
I remember there was a chocolate bunny, and I ran into Amy's room because Amy just recovered, and I said, look, the Easter bunny came, and there were chocolate eggs wrapped in foil. I was so excited. My faith in Easter bunnies was restored.
How old are you?
Gosh, kindergarten, so
Yeah.
6th grade. Yeah, 'cause I-
Six.
Not sixth
fifth,
grade.
so I was five years old.
Okay.